It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings where everything just feels right. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and David was out in his driveway doing what he loved most, taking care of his pride and joy. His 2019 Harley-Davidson Road King sat there gleaming like a piece of art, and he'd just spent the last hour waxing every inch of chrome until it practically glowed. David stood back, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, admiring his work. At 52 years old, this motorcycle meant everything to him. It wasn't just a bike. It represented years of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication to a career that most people would never fully understand. But that's the thing about David. He never felt the need to announce who he was or what he'd done. He was the quiet type, the kind of guy who kept to himself and didn't cause trouble. He'd only been living in the Oakwood Hills subdivision for about 6 months now. It was a nice neighborhood, the kind with neat lawns and white picket fences. But there was one problem, and her name was Linda Henderson. Linda was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, and she took that role very seriously. Too seriously if you asked anyone else in the neighborhood. From the moment David moved in, Linda had been on his case about everything. First, it was his grass being a 1/4 inch too long. Then it was his mailbox being the wrong shade of black, whatever that meant. Last week, she'd left a notice on his door complaining that his garden hose was visible from the street. David had dealt with it all patiently, fixing whatever she complained about with a polite smile. He'd learned a long time ago that some battles just weren't worth fighting. But as he stood there admiring his freshly waxed Harley, David noticed someone watching him from across the street. It was Tyler, Linda's 23-year-old son. David had seen him around the neighborhood a few times, always with that cocky swagger that young guys sometimes have when they've never faced any real consequences in life. Tyler started walking across the street, his expensive sneakers making scuffing sounds on the pavement. Everything about the kid screamed privilege, from his designer clothes to the way he carried himself like he owned the world. David stayed quiet, continuing to put away his waxing supplies. "Nice bike, old man," Tyler said with a smirk that made David's jaw tighten just a bit. "Must have cost you what, a few months' salary at whatever retail job you work?" David looked up at him calmly. He'd been called worse things by far more dangerous people than some spoiled kid. "Thanks," he said simply, not taking the bait. Tyler circled the Harley slowly, like a shark circling its prey. He ran his fingers along the leather seat, touching it in a way that felt disrespectful, invasive even. David watched him carefully, his instincts picking up on something he didn't quite like. Years of training had taught him to read people, and everything about this kid set off warning bells. "You know," Tyler continued, still circling the bike, "my mom says motorcycles lower property values. She's been complaining about it for weeks. Maybe you should park this thing in your garage where nobody has to look at it." David felt his patience wearing thin, but he kept his voice steady. "It's my property, and I'm well within HOA guidelines. I checked the rules before I bought the house." Tyler stopped circling and faced David directly, his expression challenging. "Yeah, well, rules can change. My mom pretty much runs this neighborhood, in case you haven't noticed. What she says goes around here." David took a deep breath, reminding himself that this was just some kid with too much time on his hands, and a mother who'd clearly never taught him any manners. "I appreciate the information," David said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "Have a good day, Tyler." For a second, Tyler looked like he wanted to say something else, but something in David's eyes must have made him think twice. Instead, he just laughed, shook his head, and walked back across the street. But before he left, he turned around one more time. "That's a really nice bike, though. Really nice. Be a shame if something happened to it." David felt a chill run down his spine at those words, but he didn't respond. He just watched Tyler walk away, making a mental note to keep an extra eye on his property. When you've spent 25 years working for the ATF, dealing with criminals and dangerous situations, you develop a sixth sense about threats. And that hadn't been just some kid talking. That had been a promise. After Tyler disappeared into his mother's house, David went inside and pulled up his home security system on his phone. He had cameras covering every angle of his property, front yard, backyard, driveway, even the street. It was more security than most people in the neighborhood had, but old habits die hard. When you've spent your career investigating organized crime and weapons trafficking, you learn to always be prepared. He scrolled through the footage from the past few weeks and noticed something interesting. Tyler had been hanging around his property more than David had realized. There were several clips of him walking by slowly, sometimes stopping to look at the Harley, sometimes taking pictures with his phone. David's gut told him this wasn't just casual interest. This was something else. The rest of the day passed normally. David grilled some burgers for lunch, watched a baseball game, and did some work in his garage. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from his conversation with Tyler. That comment about something happening to his bike kept replaying in his mind. As evening fell, David sat on his front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. Across the street he could see lights on in Linda Henderson's house. Through the window he caught glimpses of her and Tyler having what looked like an animated conversation. Tyler kept gesturing toward David's house and Linda's face looked angry. David sighed. He'd really hoped this would be a peaceful retirement. After 25 years of high-stress situations, dealing with some of the worst criminals in the country, he'd been looking forward to quiet days working on his bike and maybe doing some fishing. Instead, he'd somehow ended up in a suburban Cold War with a HOA tyrant and her entitled son. His phone buzzed with a text from his former partner at the ATF, Rick. "How's retirement treating you?" "Boring yet?" David smiled and typed back, "You have no idea. Might be more action here than our old job." Rick sent back a laughing emoji. As darkness fell completely, David set up his security system to send him instant alerts if any motion was detected near his driveway. It might seem paranoid to some people, but David had learned the hard way that preparation prevented problems. Plus, something in his gut told him that Tyler wasn't done. That comment about something happening to his bike had been too specific, too pointed to be just empty talk. David went to bed that night with his phone on his nightstand, volume turned up. The security app was open and ready. He might be retired, but some instincts never go away. And every instinct he had was telling him that trouble was coming, probably sooner than later. He was right. It would be 3 days before Tyler made his move, and when he did, it would set off a chain of events that would change everything in the quiet neighborhood of Oakwood Hills. But for now, David closed his eyes and tried to get some rest, his hand instinctively reaching for where his service weapon used to be on the nightstand, before remembering he was retired. Old habits really do die hard. 3 nights had passed since Tyler's thinly veiled threat, and David had almost convinced himself he was being paranoid. Maybe the kid was all talk. Maybe he'd just been trying to seem tough and had no real intentions. But at 2 a.m. on Wednesday night, David's phone started vibrating on his nightstand and all those maybes disappeared. His security system had picked up motion in the driveway. David grabbed his phone with practiced speed, years of responding to late-night emergencies kicking in automatically. He pulled up the camera app and what he saw made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. Tyler was in his driveway, and he wasn't alone. 2 other guys were with him, both around Tyler's age, and they were standing around David's Harley. One of them was fiddling with the steering lock while Tyler was attaching some kind of ramp to a pickup truck parked at the curb. The license plate was clearly visible on David's camera. They were trying to steal his motorcycle. David's mind went into tactical mode instantly. He mentally ran through his options. He could call the police and stay inside, let them handle it. That would be the safe, smart thing to do. But these punks were touching his bike, and David had never been good at sitting back and waiting when action was needed. He pulled on a pair of jeans and a dark t-shirt, moving quietly through his house. No need to wake up the whole neighborhood. Not yet anyway. He grabbed his phone, making sure the security footage was recording to the cloud. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence. David stepped out his front door, moving silently across his lawn. Years of tactical training meant he knew how to approach without being heard. He got within 10 feet of them before Tyler's friends even noticed he was there. "Gentlemen," David said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge that made all 3 of them jump. "I strongly suggest you step away from my motorcycle. Right now." Tyler spun around, his face showing surprise that quickly morphed into that same cocky smirk from a few days ago. His 2 friends looked significantly less confident, both taking an instinctive step backward. "Or what, old man?" Tyler said, puffing up his chest like he was tough. "You gonna fight all 3 of us? You gonna call your wife? Oh wait, I bet you don't have one, living alone like a loser." David didn't rise to the bait. He simply held up his phone, showing them the screen with the security footage playing in real time. I have you on 4 different cameras from multiple angles, attempting to steal my motorcycle. That's grand theft auto. It's a felony. Each of you is looking at serious prison time." The 2 friends immediately put their hands up, one of them stammering. Whoa, man, we didn't know. Tyler said you gave him permission to—" "Shut up." Tyler snapped at his friends before turning back to David. But David could see the calculation happening behind the kid's eyes. The bravado was still there, but underneath it there was uncertainty. "Look," one of Tyler's friends said, his voice shaking. "We're really sorry. We'll just leave, okay? We didn't touch anything." "You absolutely touched my motorcycle," David said calmly. "It's all on video. But you're right about one thing. You are going to leave. After the police get here." Tyler laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Do you have any idea who my family is? My mom runs this entire neighborhood. My uncle's a lawyer, a really good one. We'll sue you into the ground for harassment, for false accusations, for emotional distress. By the time we're done with you, you'll be begging to move out." David just looked at him, his expression completely neutral. He'd heard threats from cartel members, from arms dealers, from people who actually had the power and connections to back up their words. Tyler was just a spoiled kid who'd never faced real consequences in his life. "Is that right?" David said quietly. "That's right," Tyler shot back. "You're nobody. You're just some old guy with a motorcycle. We're somebody. My family matters in this town." Tyler's friends were edging toward the truck now, clearly wanting to get out of there. One of them tugged on Tyler's sleeve. "Dude, come on, let's just go. This is insane. Your mom's gonna kill you if you get arrested." But Tyler wasn't listening. He was caught up in his own delusion of invincibility, that same entitled attitude that had probably gotten him out of trouble his whole life. "I'm calling the cops," he announced, pulling out his phone. "On you for threatening us. For coming out here with a weapon and threatening 3 innocent people." "I don't have a weapon," David said calmly. "That's not what I'm going to tell them," Tyler said with a nasty grin. "I'm going to tell them you came out here with a gun, waving it around, threatening to shoot us. 3 witnesses against 1. Who do you think they're going to believe?" David felt a flicker of anger but kept it locked down. This was exactly the kind of false accusation that could ruin lives, and Tyler knew it. He was weaponizing the police, trying to turn David's call for help against him. Tyler was already on the phone with dispatch, his voice suddenly panicked and afraid. "Yes, hello, I need police immediately. There's a man threatening us with a gun. He came out of nowhere and started yelling that he was going to kill us. We're at 742 Maple Street. Please hurry, he's really unstable." David's jaw tightened as he listened to Tyler's performance. The kid was good at lying, he'd give him that. Years of practice probably, getting bailed out by his mother. Tyler's friends looked uncomfortable, one of them shaking his head slightly. But neither of them contradicted Tyler's story. "You're making a huge mistake," David said quietly. "The only mistake here is yours, old man," Tyler shot back. "You should have just let us take the bike. Would have saved you a lot of trouble. Now you're about to get arrested, and when you're in jail, maybe I'll come back and finish what I started." Within minutes, David could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. Lights were starting to come on in neighboring houses. People were looking out their windows, wondering what was happening. And right on cue, Linda Henderson came bursting out of her house in a silk robe, her face a mask of concern and anger. "What's going on out here?" she demanded, rushing over to Tyler and immediately positioning herself between him and David. "Tyler, honey, are you okay? Did this man hurt you?" "He threatened us, Mom," Tyler said, his voice still shaking like he was the victim. "We were just walking by and he came out with a gun, screaming at us." Linda's face went red with fury as she turned on David. "I knew you were trouble from the moment you moved in." "I knew it. You're dangerous, you're unstable, and you don't belong in this neighborhood." David said nothing. There was no point in arguing with her, not when the police were about to arrive. Better to stay calm, stay quiet, and let the evidence speak for itself. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, their lights painting the quiet street in red and blue. 4 officers got out, hands resting near their weapons, clearly responding to a call about an armed individual. David very carefully kept his hands visible and didn't make any sudden movements. A veteran officer with gray hair approached first, his eyes taking in the scene. David standing calmly by his motorcycle, Tyler and his friends near the truck with the ramp, Linda Henderson playing the protective mother. "I'm Officer Davis," he said, his voice professional and neutral. We got a call about a disturbance involving a weapon. Who called? I did, officer. Tyler jumped in immediately. This man came out of his house and threatened us with a gun. He was screaming completely out of control. We're just lucky he didn't shoot us. Officer Davis looked at David. Sir, do you have a weapon on you? No, sir, David said calmly. You're welcome to search me if needed. He probably put it away when he heard the sirens. Linda interjected. You need to search his house. This man is dangerous. The other officers were spreading out, assessing the situation. One of them, a younger officer with sharp eyes, was looking at Tyler and his friends with open skepticism. He'd noticed the ramp attached to the truck, the positioning of everyone in the scene. Can someone tell me what actually happened here? Officer Davis asked, his tone making it clear he wasn't buying the story completely. I can, David said quietly, and I have video evidence to back it up. Tyler's face went pale for just a second before he recovered. He's lying. Whatever he shows you is fake. He probably edited it. But Officer Davis was already looking at David with a different kind of attention. There was something about the way David carried himself, the calm in his voice despite being accused of a serious crime, the way he'd kept his hands visible and cooperated immediately. Sir, Officer Davis said to David, have you worked in law enforcement? And that's when everything changed. David looked at Officer Davis and gave a small nod. ATF, 25 years. Retired last year. The change in the officer's demeanor was immediate. Officer Davis's partner, the younger cop whose name tag read Rodriguez, straightened up with recognition in his eyes. Even the other two officers adjusted their stance, their hands moving away from their weapons. 25 years with the ATF? Rodriguez said, respect clear in his voice. Sir, what division? Tactical operations mostly, David said simply. Some investigation work, some field operations. Various assignments over the years. Linda Henderson's confident expression started to crack just a little. She clearly hadn't expected this. Tyler was looking between the officers and David, confusion replacing his earlier smugness. That doesn't mean anything, Linda said, her voice rising. I don't care what job he had. My son and his friends were threatened. They have rights. Officer Davis held up a hand, his patience clearly wearing thin. Ma'am, let's let everyone speak. You mentioned video evidence, sir? David pulled out his phone and pulled up his security app. I have a full camera system covering my property. 4 cameras with different angles, all time-stamped, all uploaded to cloud storage in real time. Would you like to see what actually happened? That's not necessary. Tyler started, but Officer Davis cut him off. Actually, it's very necessary. Let's take a look. David handed his phone to Officer Davis, who huddled with Rodriguez to watch the footage. The video was crystal clear. It showed Tyler and his 2 friends approaching the Harley at 2:07 a.m. It showed them examining the steering lock, discussing how to get the bike onto the truck. It showed Tyler attaching the ramp. And most importantly, it captured audio. This thing's got to be worth at least 15 grand, one of Tyler's friends could be heard saying on the video. You sure your mom can fix this if we get caught? Dude, my mom fixes everything, Tyler's voice responded. Besides, this old guy's got no proof. We'll have this bike sold before he even knows it's gone. I know a guy who'll flip it, no questions asked. Officer Davis's face hardened as he watched. Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. They continued watching as the video showed David emerging from his house, approaching calmly, holding up his phone. No gun, no weapon of any kind. Just a middle-aged man in jeans and a t-shirt confronting people trying to steal his property. The video even captured Tyler's fake 911 call, his voice suddenly panicked and afraid, completely different from the cocky tone he'd been using seconds before. Officer Davis looked up from the phone, his jaw tight. He looked at Tyler, then at his 2 friends, then at Linda Henderson, who was starting to realize this wasn't going the way she'd planned. Ma'am, Officer Davis said to Linda, his tone professional but cold. Your son and his 2 friends are on video with audio, attempting to steal this gentleman's motorcycle. They were discussing selling it. That's grand theft auto, which is a felony. That video could be edited. Linda protested, but her voice lacked conviction now. Or taken out of context. My son would never. Ma'am, this is timestamp verified, cloud-stored security footage, Rodriguez interjected. This isn't something you can edit in real time. This is legitimate evidence of a crime in progress. Tyler's friends were now openly panicking. One of them stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Officer, look, we didn't know. Tyler told us the bike was his, that he just needed help moving it. We didn't know we were stealing anything." "Shut up." Tyler hissed at him, but it was too late. "That's interesting," Officer Davis said, "because the audio on this video has you discussing how much the bike is worth and how you'd sell it. Doesn't sound like you thought it was his property." The friend went pale and fell silent. Tyler was starting to sweat now, his earlier confidence completely gone. He looked at his mother desperately, waiting for her to fix this like she'd apparently fixed everything else in his life. Linda tried a different approach, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Officers, please. There must be some misunderstanding here. My son is a good boy. He's never been in trouble. Maybe they were just looking at the motorcycle, admiring it. Young men like motorcycles, that's natural. And this man," she pointed at David, "he came out aggressively. He scared them. That's why Tyler called you." "Ma'am," Officer Davis said, his voice firm, "your son filed a false police report. He claimed this gentleman threatened him with a gun. That's a serious offense. It wastes police resources, and it could have put everyone here in danger. We responded to an armed threat call. That means we came prepared for a potentially deadly situation." Rodriguez nodded, adding, "False police reports are criminal acts themselves, ma'am. They carry serious penalties." David, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Officers, I'd like to formally press charges for the attempted theft of my motorcycle and for filing a false police report." "You can't do this," Linda shrieked, her composure finally breaking completely. "Do you have any idea who we are? My husband knows the mayor personally. My brother is a prominent attorney. We will sue you. We will make your life a living hell. You'll regret this." Officer Davis had clearly had enough. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and calm down. Your son committed a crime. We have clear video evidence. Making threats isn't going to help his situation." Tyler was staring at the ground now, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. His two friends were already being separated and questioned by the other officers, and from their body language they were cooperating fully. Rodriguez approached Tyler with handcuffs. "Son, you need to turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for attempted grand theft auto and filing a false police report." "No." Linda lunged forward, trying to physically block the officer from reaching her son. "You can't arrest him. He's just a boy. This is police brutality. I'll have your badge." Officer Davis stepped between Linda and Rodriguez, his voice taking on a warning tone. "Ma'am, if you interfere with this arrest, you will be arrested for obstruction. Step back. Now." For a moment, it looked like Linda might actually try to physically fight the officers. Her face was red, her eyes wild with fury and desperation. But David could see the exact moment she realized she had no power here. The law didn't care who her husband knew or how much influence she had in the neighborhood HOA. Rodriguez cuffed Tyler, reading him his rights in a calm, professional voice. Tyler was silent now, all the fight gone out of him. His mother was crying, angry tears streaming down her face as she watched her son being led to the patrol car. The other two friends were cuffed as well and placed in the second patrol car. As the officers were processing the arrests, neighbors were emerging from their houses, watching the scene unfold. David could see faces in windows, hear whispered conversations. The perfect suburban street had become a crime scene. Linda turned to David, her face a mask of pure hatred. "This is your fault. All of this is your fault. We welcomed you to this neighborhood, and this is how you repay us. By destroying my son's life?" David met her gaze calmly. "Your son tried to steal my motorcycle, then lied to the police and claimed I threatened him with a gun. I didn't destroy his life. He made his own choices. He's 23 years old. He's practically still a child. Everyone makes mistakes at that age." Linda was grasping at straws now, her voice pleading. "When I was 23, David said quietly, I was serving my country and learning that actions have consequences. Your son is an adult in the eyes of the law. He committed a felony and then he tried to cover it up with another crime. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior." Officer Davis approached them with David's phone. "Mr. Chen, I forwarded the video evidence to our department. You'll need to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. We'll also need you to document any damage to your property." "There's no damage," David said. "They didn't get far enough to actually move the bike. But I appreciate you responding so quickly." "Actually," Rodriguez said, approaching them, "we should be thanking you for having such clear security footage. Makes our job a lot easier." Too many times we show up to situations with no evidence, just conflicting stories. This is black and white. Officer Davis nodded. And between you and me, sir, thank you for your service. 25 years with ATF, that's impressive. Lot of dangerous work, David shrugged. I was just doing my job, same as you're doing yours tonight. As the patrol cars prepared to leave with Tyler and his friends inside, Linda made one last, desperate attempt. She grabbed Officer Davis's arm. Please, isn't there anything we can do? Community service? Restitution? My son can pay for the bike. We'll buy him 2 bikes. Just please don't take him to jail. Officer Davis gently removed her hand from his arm. Ma'am, your son committed a felony. This is beyond warnings and community service. He'll be processed at the station, and he'll see a judge for bail hearing. I suggest you call that attorney brother of yours. The patrol cars pulled away, their lights still flashing, carrying Tyler and his friends to a very different reality than the one they'd woken up to that morning. Linda stood in the middle of the street, her silk robe billowing in the early morning breeze. Looking suddenly small and defeated, David watched her for a moment, feeling an unexpected twinge of something that might have been pity. Then he turned and walked back to his house, leaving his Harley sitting safely in the driveway right where it belonged. The sun would be coming up in a few hours, and David had a feeling the neighborhood of Oakwood Hills would be very different when it did. The next morning felt surreal. David sat on his front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. The sun was painting everything in soft golden light. Birds were singing, and you'd never know that just a few hours ago. 3 young men had been arrested right here in this driveway, but the neighborhood knew. Oh, they definitely knew. David could see curtains twitching in windows. People were walking their dogs past his house more slowly than usual, sneaking glances at him and his Harley. A few brave neighbors even waved, which was more acknowledgement than he'd gotten in the 6 months he'd lived here. Linda Henderson's influence had been so strong that most people had kept their distance from David, not wanting to get on her bad side. Around 9 in the morning, David's doorbell rang. He opened it to find his next-door neighbor, an older gentleman named Walter, standing there with a nervous expression. Hi there, Walter said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I just wanted to say, well, I'm glad you're okay. Heard what happened last night. Whole neighborhood's talking about it. David invited him in for coffee, and Walter seemed relieved to accept. Once they were settled at the kitchen table, Walter's story came pouring out. That Henderson woman has made life miserable for a lot of us, Walter said, stirring sugar into his coffee with shaking hands. 3 years ago, she gave me 16 HOA violations in 1 month. 16. My wife was sick at the time, dying actually, and I couldn't keep up with the yard work. Linda didn't care. She threatened to fine me, to put a lien on my house. I had to hire a lawn service I couldn't afford just to get her off my back. David listened quietly as Walter continued. She's done stuff like that to dozens of families here. The Johnsons down the street? She reported them to CPS because their kids' toys were visible in the front yard, called it creating an eyesore, and suggested they were neglectful parents. CPS investigated for 3 months. Found nothing, of course, but the stress nearly destroyed that family. Why didn't anyone stand up to her? David asked, though he had a pretty good idea of the answer. Walter laughed bitterly. Because she's connected. Her husband really does know the mayor. Her brother really is a lawyer, and he's threatened lawsuits against half the neighborhood. Most of us couldn't afford to fight back, so we just tried to stay off her radar. But you... Walter looked at David with something like admiration. You didn't back down. After Walter left, 3 more neighbors stopped by throughout the day. Each of them had their own horror story about Linda. Henderson, the single mom who'd been harassed about her car being too old and decrepit for the neighborhood. The elderly couple who'd been fined for their mailbox being dented. The family who'd been reported to code enforcement because their fence was 3 inches taller than regulations allowed. David started to realize that Tyler's behavior hadn't come from nowhere. He'd been raised by a mother who believed rules applied to everyone except them, who used her power to bully and control people, who taught her son that money and connections made you untouchable. 2 days later, David went to the police station to give his formal statement. The detective handling the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Phillips, was impressed with the quality of his security footage. This is exactly the kind of evidence we dream about, she told David as they reviewed the video frame by frame. Clear visuals, clean audio, timestamps that can be verified. And the fact that your former ATF doesn't hurt. You know how to document evidence properly. What's going to happen to Tyler and his friends? David asked. Detective Phillips leaned back in her chair. Well, Tyler's looking at felony charges for attempted grand theft auto. That's a serious crime. Plus the false police report, which is a separate offense. His two friends are cooperating, claiming Tyler told them the bike was his and they were just helping him move it. Prosecutors are considering offering them deals if they testify. And Linda Henderson, the mother? Detective Phillips raised an eyebrow. Nothing criminal on her part, technically. Being an overbearing parent isn't illegal, though between you and me I've been doing some checking. Tyler's got a history, sealed juvenile record, but I can see the outline of it. Vandalism, shoplifting, assault. Every time charges were dropped or reduced, his mother's lawyer brother made things go away. David nodded, not surprised. Can't make things go away this time. No, sir, Detective Phillips said with satisfaction. Not with video evidence this solid. Tyler's looking at real consequences for the first time in his life. A week after the arrests, David received a call from a lawyer. Not Linda's brother, a different attorney representing Tyler's two friends. They wanted to know if David would be willing to meet with their clients, who wanted to apologize in person. David agreed, curious about what they had to say. The meeting took place at the lawyer's office, a modest suite in a strip mall. The two young men, their names were Brett and Chris, looked nothing like the cocky kids from that night. They looked scared and ashamed. Mr. Chen, Brett started, his voice shaking. We wanted to say we're sorry, really truly sorry. We were stupid. We knew what we were doing was wrong. But Tyler kept saying it was fine, that you wouldn't care, that it was practically his bike anyway because you owed his mom money or something. Chris nodded vigorously. We should have known better. We should have walked away. But Tyler's been our friend since high school, and he's always getting away with stuff, so we thought. He trailed off, realizing how dumb it sounded. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s, spoke up. Mr. Chen, my clients are prepared to testify against Tyler Henderson. They've been fully cooperative with police. They're also willing to perform community service and pay restitution for any damages, even though technically no damage occurred. David studied the two young men. They reminded him of guys he'd worked with in the past. Good people who'd made terrible decisions because of bad influences. What do you two do for a living? He asked. I'm in college, Brett said. Business major, or I was. Might get kicked out because of this. I work at a warehouse, Chris added, but I'll probably lose that job when this all goes public. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I appreciate the apology. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. But you need to understand something. You committed a felony. You were going to steal something that represents years of my hard work and dedication. If I hadn't caught you, if I hadn't had cameras, you would have taken my motorcycle and sold it, and I never would have seen it again. Both young men nodded, tears in their eyes. That being said, David continued, I believe in second chances. I'll speak to the prosecutor about your cooperation and your remorse. But you need to testify honestly about what happened. No protecting Tyler, no minimizing what you did. The truth, the whole truth. Yes, sir, they said in unison. The lawyer looked relieved. Thank you, Mr. Chen. That's very generous of you. Meanwhile, Tyler's situation was getting worse. His prominent lawyer uncle had indeed shown up and promptly recommended Tyler take a plea deal. The video evidence was too damning, the charges too serious. But Tyler, still influenced by his mother's delusions of invincibility, refused. Linda Henderson went on a crusade around the neighborhood, trying to drum up support for her son. She organized a petition claiming David was a violent threat to the community and should be forced to move. She showed up at the police station demanding the charges be dropped. She even tried to get the security footage thrown out, claiming it violated privacy laws. None of it worked. The legal system had finally caught up with Tyler Henderson, and no amount of connections or money was going to save him this time. David heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Linda's husband was furious with her. He was a successful real estate developer, and the scandal was affecting his business reputation. Apparently, he'd been telling people for years that Linda needed to back off with the HOA tyranny, but she'd never listened. 2 weeks after the arrest, there was a scheduled HOA meeting. David normally didn't attend these. He'd learned early on that they were just platforms for Linda to exercise her petty authority. But this time he decided to go. The meeting was packed. Usually only 5 or 6 people showed up. Tonight there were at least 40 residents crammed into the community center, and the energy in the room was electric. David took a seat in the back and watched. Linda called the meeting to order, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. She tried to move through the normal agenda, approving minutes, discussing budget items, reviewing landscaping contracts. But nobody was interested in any of that. Finally, a man David recognized as Walter's neighbor stood up. "I'd like to make a motion to remove Linda Henderson from the HOA board." The room erupted. People started standing up one after another, sharing stories of harassment, unfair fines, threats, and abuse of power. It was like a dam had broken and years of resentment came flooding out. A woman in her 30s stood up, her voice breaking with emotion. "My daughter has autism. She has sensory issues and finds comfort in having specific toys outside. Linda reported us to CPS, claiming we were neglectful parents because our yard wasn't pristine. Do you know what it's like to have social workers investigate you because your special needs child has toys in the yard?" An elderly man stood next, his hands trembling. "I'm a Korean War veteran. I put a small flag display in my front yard on Veterans Day. Linda gave me a violation for unapproved decorative items and made me take it down. I served my country, and she treated me like a criminal for honoring my fellow veterans." Story after story poured out. David sat in the back, saying nothing, just witnessing the community finally finding its voice. Linda's face went through a range of emotions: anger, defiance, fear, and finally something that might have been shame. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Every single person voted to remove Linda from the board. She was also stripped of her enforcement authority and banned from attending future meetings unless specifically invited. Linda gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked out of the community center without a word. David watched her go, feeling neither satisfaction nor pity. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was just about accountability. 6 months after that night in the driveway, the neighborhood of Oakwood Hills had transformed into something completely different. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the community for years had lifted, and people actually smiled and waved at each other now. Kids played in front yards without fear of HOA violations. The Johnsons put up a small playground set for their children. Walter planted a garden with flowers spilling cheerfully over the regulation height. Tyler's legal case had finally concluded. His 2 friends, Brett and Chris, had accepted plea deals. They received probation, community service, and their records would be expunged after completion of their sentences. David had spoken on their behalf at their sentencing hearing, telling the judge they'd shown genuine remorse and deserved a second chance. Tyler hadn't been so lucky. He'd refused every plea deal offered, convinced that his mother's connections would somehow save him. They didn't. The jury trial lasted 3 days, and the video evidence was overwhelming. Tyler was found guilty on all counts: attempted grand theft auto and filing a false police report. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered him to pay restitution to David for legal fees and the cost of upgrading his security system. More significantly, Tyler now had a felony record that would follow him for the rest of his life. David had attended the sentencing hearing. He watched Linda Henderson sitting in the courtroom, her designer clothes and perfect makeup unable to hide the devastation in her eyes as she watched her son face real consequences for the first time in his life. The judge had been particularly harsh in his remarks. "Mr. Henderson, you had every advantage in life: a loving family, financial security, opportunities that many young people never receive. And you squandered all of that because you believed you were above the law. Your mother's attempts to intimidate witnesses and pressure law enforcement officials only made your situation worse. Perhaps this experience will teach you something your parents failed to, that in this country, everyone is accountable for their actions, regardless of who they know or how much money they have." As part of his probation, Tyler was required to complete his community service at a veterans center, helping elderly and disabled veterans with daily tasks. David heard through the grapevine that Tyler had initially been resentful and angry, treating it like a punishment to be endured. But something changed after a few months. One Saturday afternoon, David was in his driveway working on his Harley when a car pulled up. He looked up to see Tyler getting out, moving slowly and hesitantly. David stood up, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, waiting. Tyler approached with his head down, hands in his pockets. He looked different, thinner with shadows under his eyes, and without that cocky swagger that had defined him before. "Mr. Chen," Tyler said quietly, I have something for you." He pulled out an envelope from his jacket and held it out. David took it, noting that Tyler's hands were shaking. Inside was a handwritten letter, not typed, not printed, but actually written by hand in careful script. David pulled out the letter and read it while Tyler stood there, looking like he wanted to run, but forcing himself to stay. "Dear Mr. Chen," the letter began, "I've started this letter probably 50 times and thrown it away each time because I don't know how to properly apologize for what I did. My lawyer told me I had to write this as part of my probation, but that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because I finally understand what I did to you, and I'm genuinely sorry. For the past 6 months, I've been working at the Veterans Center. At first, I hated it. I thought it was stupid and pointless, and I spent most of my time feeling sorry for myself. But then I started actually talking to the veterans I was helping, really listening to their stories. I met a man named Frank who served in Vietnam. He's 80 years old now, and he told me about coming home after the war and saving up for 3 years to buy his first motorcycle. He said it represented freedom to him, a way to feel alive again after everything he'd been through. When he talked about that bike, his whole face lit up, and I realized that's what your Harley was to you. It wasn't just a piece of metal and chrome. It represented something important, your years of service, your sacrifices, your hard work. And I tried to steal it like it was nothing, like you were nothing. I've learned a lot about ATF agents from the veterans I work with. Some of them have worked with ATF on joint operations. They told me stories about the dangerous situations you guys handle, the criminals you face, the risks you take. And I showed up at your house thinking I could intimidate you because I was young and had my mom's protection. I was an arrogant, entitled fool. The worst part is I filed a false police report. I lied and said you threatened me with a gun. I didn't care that I could have gotten you arrested or worse. I didn't care that the police might have responded to that call thinking they were walking into a deadly situation. I only cared about myself and getting away with what I'd done. My mom spent my whole life teaching me that rules didn't apply to us, that we were better than other people, that money and connections could fix anything. It took me losing everything to realize how wrong that was. I lost my friends, I lost my reputation. I have a felony record now that will affect the rest of my life. I can't vote. I can't own a gun. Most employers won't hire me. But you know what? I deserved all of that, and I'm grateful for it because it finally forced me to grow up and see the world as it really is, not the distorted version my mother created. I know this letter doesn't change anything. I know you probably don't care about my apology, but I wanted you to know that the past 6 months have changed me. The veterans I work with have taught me about honor, sacrifice, and taking responsibility for your actions. I'm trying to be the person I should have been all along. I'm truly sorry for what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it. Thank you for showing me that actions have consequences, even when it was a lesson I desperately didn't want to learn. Sincerely, Tyler Henderson. David folded the letter carefully and looked at Tyler, who was staring at the ground, his jaw clenched like he was fighting tears. "How's the work at the Veterans Center?" David asked. Tyler looked up, surprised by the question. "It's actually really good. Hard, but good. Those guys have been through things I can't even imagine, and they're still kind to me even though I'm there because I committed a crime. Frank, the guy I mentioned in the letter, he's been teaching me about motorcycle maintenance. Says everyone should know how to take care of their own bike." David nodded slowly. "Frank's right. You planning to get a motorcycle?" "Can't," Tyler said with a bitter laugh. "Felony conviction means most insurance companies won't cover me, and the ones that will charge ridiculous rates. Besides, I probably can't afford one for years. I'm working 2 jobs just to pay off the restitution and my lawyer fees." There was a long silence. Then David said, "Your probation requires 2 years of community service at the Veterans Center. What are you planning to do after that?" Tyler shrugged. "I don't know. Keep working there if they'll have me, I guess. It's the first time in my life I've done something that actually matters, you know. Frank and the other vets, they depend on me. They trust me. Nobody's ever trusted me before because I never gave them a reason to. David studied the young man in front of him. 6 months ago, Tyler had been an arrogant, entitled kid who thought he was untouchable. Now he was someone who'd been broken down and was slowly building himself back up into something better. Tyler, David said slowly, I'm not going to tell you that everything is forgiven or that we're friends now. What you did was serious, and the consequences you're facing are appropriate. Tyler nodded, his expression accepting. But, David continued, I spent 25 years in law enforcement, and I learned that people aren't defined by their worst moment. They're defined by what they do after that moment. You could have stayed bitter and resentful. Instead, you're trying to learn and grow. That matters. For the first time since arriving, Tyler made eye contact with David. There was hope in his eyes, mixed with uncertainty. If you're serious about learning motorcycle maintenance, David said, I could use some help with basic tune-ups and cleaning. Not on my Harley. I'm very particular about that, but I sometimes work on bikes for other veterans who can't afford shop rates. It's volunteer work, unpaid, but it would give you experience, and it would count toward your community service hours. Tyler's eyes went wide. You'd let me help you? After what I did? I'm not doing it for you, David said firmly. I'm doing it for the veterans who need affordable maintenance work. But if you show up on time, work hard, and actually learn something, then yeah, you can help. First time you show attitude or entitlement, you're done. Understood? Yes, sir, Tyler said quickly. Absolutely. When do I start? Next Saturday, 7 a.m. Don't be late. After Tyler left, David sat back down on his porch with a fresh cup of coffee. He thought about the past 6 months, about how one night had changed so many lives. Linda Henderson had become a pariah in the neighborhood. She rarely left her house anymore, and when she did, people avoided her. Her husband had apparently moved into a separate bedroom and was spending most of his time at his office. The marriage was crumbling under the weight of the scandal, but the neighborhood itself had flourished. Without Linda's oppressive enforcement of rules, people had relaxed. They'd started having block parties and neighborhood barbecues. Kids played in the streets. People actually talked to each other instead of hiding in their houses. Walter had become a good friend. They had coffee together most mornings, talking about everything from politics to baseball to the best way to grow tomatoes. Walter's wife had passed away 2 years ago, and he'd been lonely. Now he was part of a community again. The Johnsons, the family with the autistic daughter, had invited David over for dinner. Their daughter Sophie had shown him her toy collection with pride, arranging them in careful patterns in the front yard without fear of violations or harassment. David looked at his Harley, gleaming in the afternoon sun. It had been at the center of a storm that had changed everything. But in the end, it was just a motorcycle. What mattered was what it had revealed. The strength of a community when it finally found its voice, the power of accountability, and the possibility of redemption for those willing to change. Next Saturday, Tyler would show up at 7 a.m. David wasn't sure if the kid would stick with it or if this was just another phase, but he'd give him the chance because that's what you did. You gave people the opportunity to be better than they were, and then you let them prove whether they were capable of taking it.